Hello, everyone. Thanks for returning to our Obligations of Memory podcast episodes with Zola Shuman from coming to live from Cape Town, South Africa. We're for the Jewish Holocaust and Remembrance group. I'm Jeffery Giesener, founder. And Zola was born in Cape Town, South Africa, as the daughter of two Vilna-born Holocaust survivors, Israel Jutan and Yiddish actress and singer Chayela Rosenthal. And so I'm happy to bring you back. We're having great fun. The audience is going to be loving the music that we're playing in the talk. And so you were talking about your father and his career, and on behind you is his parents, right? And maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you know about their lives of growing up in also Vilna. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay,
So,
and just for our audience's benefit, what country is Vilna in?
so Poland, Lithuania, depending on which time of year you were looking.
Yep.
So the picture at the top on the right is my parents. The picture on the left, if I've got it right, are my father's parents,
Right.
Zacharias and Vava. So Zacharias, also born in Vilna, he was a medical doctor, and he was one of 5 children, and his father was a very religious Orthodox Jew who owned hotels and inns, but very strictly religious Orthodox, and he was one of 12 children. So my grandfather, Zacharias, was a medical doctor, but also a councilman, and he was also president of the Volunteer Firemen Association and president of the Jewish Widows and Orphans Foundation, and he often traveled even to America to raise money for the widows and orphans. And I also learned that he was extremely generous, and he sponsored and supported and provided schooling for a number of orphaned children. So he was extremely generous, but a busy man, not a hugely attentive father. My father was an only child, and his mother was a Russian unorthodox Jew that his father had met when he was in the army in Russia, and she was a nurse. And his father, Zacharias's father, the Orthodox religious man, never accepted her, never accepted Vava because she wasn't good enough. She was not Orthodox, she was Jewish, but she was Russian, and that was pastnit, that would not do. So he never paid her any attention. The only time he came to the house was for my father's bris, and he basically saw that the work was done and then left the house. And so there were a lot of issues in the marriage, and sadly my father's parents did divorce when he was quite young. And he had a stepmother soon. My grandfather had married another lady who was also a medical doctor, who was apparently lovely, but my father was angry and treated her as the stepmother, sadly. His mom moved to Paris, and he would visit her in Paris very often. So he traveled between Paris and Vilna a lot. And growing up, he had a good life. He loved Vilna. He absolutely loved Vilna. He loved to go up into the forest. They had a summer house, and he would play in the park, and he sometimes went into the churches with his governess, and he just was enthralled by adventure and learning. He was a good soccer player, apparently, but it wasn't his passion. His passion was writing and stamps and reading. And his father actually enrolled him to New York Columbia University, which he got accepted to be a doctor. But my father wasn't that keen, and he rather wanted to go to Palestine because he became a Zionist. He joined Masada, which was the revisionist group, as a youth, and he was very, very pro-Palestine and wanted to go to Israel, which wasn't Israel yet. And he applied to Haifa Technikon and got accepted there as well. But he thought he needed to please his father, so he accepted and was going to go to Columbia in New York, but then my father's father had an angina attack, and my dad decided not to leave him because he was the only child, so he stayed behind, and then war broke out. So that was the end of that particular career path. And when the war broke out, my father was actually in Paris at the time visiting his mom, but he got papers to say, quickly get back into Poland, otherwise we're not sure what will happen. And he came back to Vilna, and he got a job through his father, because of councilmen and who he knew. He got a job in the administration, in the office, in the Polish, Lithuanian, Russian, now I'm forgetting which one, German, Polish, I can't remember. He got a job in the offices in the city administration, because my father knew lots of languages. He studied and learned lots of languages, including English, German, French. So he was called in and got a job to listen to radio broadcasts and transcribe what was happening all over Europe. So that was his job, basically, until the Vilna ghetto time. So I want to go back to one little story where he also kept writing for various newspapers at the same time. And in a few months before the invasion of Germany, my father used to listen to the radio, and he would hear my mother's voice singing. And one time he went to a concert where she was singing, and he wrote an article about her in the newspaper, of this amazing 16-year-old girl who sings so beautifully, but he never met her then. And fast forward, he also wrote another article because she won a singing competition to represent Lithuania in an international song festival that was going to be held in Moscow. And she was so excited to go to Moscow. She was only 16, but the concert was in June, and then the war broke out, and they were unfortunately not going to Moscow. So that set the precedent, but my father was very enamored with her, but still never met her, and she did not know he existed. Interestingly enough, she ends up marrying him, obviously, later, and he's this newspaper man, and her father basically owned and ran and was the editor of the Polish Yiddish main newspaper, Die Ovent Courier. So newspapers and journalism and writing, it was beschert.
Beschert, yes.
It was beschert. So my father was in the Vilna ghetto, and his father was with him, and Jacob Gens he knew my grandfather and saved him a number of times when he was going to be killed or taken away for Action. All of these detailed stories of the experiences of the war in the ghetto, you can all find on the website that I created for my family. So I won't go into all the details.
And what's the URL?
The URL is basically chayela.wordpress.com.
Can you spell that so
Chayela, so it's Chayela.
Very good.
Chayela, chayela.wordpress.com. And there's
How many years difference between your father and your mother?
We always knew it was 7 years, but then I see that my father was born in 1919 and my mother was born in 1924. So that's not 7 years, but we grew up knowing it was 7 years. Okay. My father used to make up a lot of stories that somehow, eventually, we had to just manipulate a little to get to the truth. He was a storyteller.
My father would do the same, and we would call that chokmas.
Absolutely. He would send me out to, because we got in free to movies because he was a movie critic. He would say, just tell them Mr. Peart sent you, it'll be fine. And I would go there and nobody knew who Mr. Peart was. It's just like, he would embarrass me so much. Don't worry, everybody knows me. He was one of those.
So
So, yes.
I want to take us back into what I love to listen to. And so I am going to go back here and we're going to discuss this song in a little bit.
All through the fall, when the leaves are colored bright and jack-o'-lanterns glow every cool autumn night, it's that magical season when we all go trick-or-treating, that special time of year when Halloween is here. One day I picked a pumpkin to put outside my door. That night I awoke to a rat-tat-tapping I'd never heard before. I came down to find my pumpkin, a rat-tat-tapping his feet. He was hopping around and dancing to a musical beat. He was twisting and twirling, rocking and rolling. That dancing pumpkin was amazing, tapping and turning, spinning and swirling. That dancing pumpkin sure can dance. He told me a secret I can share with you. He said each and every pumpkin has a job they have to do. They are here to keep us safe, to guard our houses night and day. And if they see any monsters, they will chase them away. Then he'll go twisting and twirling, rocking and rolling. That dancing pumpkin, he's amazing, tapping and turning, spinning and swirling. That dancing pumpkin sure can dance. That dancing pumpkin had the very biggest smile. He had courage and charisma and such a friendly style. In his black top hat and shiny shoes and snow white gloves, he's a rainbow tornado when he's doing what he loves. But when the bright morning sun begins to rise, that special dancing pumpkin with his kind, honest eyes turns back into the jack-o'-lantern sitting by the door, ready for the night when he will dance once more. He'll go twisting and twirling, rocking and rolling. That dancing pumpkin, he's amazing, tapping and turning, spinning and swirling. That dancing pumpkin sure can dance. That dancing pumpkin sure can dance.
So Zola, you wrote that song in 2017, is that right?
2007. Sorry,
2007.
it was probably a
Okay.
typo.
Okay. And so I look at the three pictures, your mother, you in the middle, and Nava on the bottom, and you look so alike. And each one of you, you earlier mentioned, are also musically inclined. So when you sat down and you wrote the pumpkin song, how does it tie you back to your mother, and how does it tie you back to your sister?
So music was just something that came to us, obviously, handed down through the generations, through the blood, the gift from God. And I was always singing. Apparently, I was singing before I was talking. And my sister was singing before me and playing the piano, and my mother, we were all singing around the house. There was always music happening. And I began to make up songs when I was quite little, just make up little songs and make up songs on the piano also. I had a musical ear. I did take piano lessons, but I gave them up very quickly because the lessons were boring, and I wanted to play what I wanted to play, what I could hear in my head. So sadly, I still today cannot read music. I tried learning, but gave up because it was just too much work. And I just heard what I wanted to play. And now you can just do it, lay down 15 tracks and you sound amazing. So I began to write little songs when I was little. I even formed a little band. They were called the Triple Ripple when I was 10 years old. There were 3 of us, and I was the leader, obviously. And we sang like a little trio of song in that same concert that we did Sisters from the previous episode. And I just kept writing songs. And then when I started to teach, I wrote my own wedding song and subsequently wrote about 12 more wedding songs for all of my friends, the first dance wedding song. And my sister always said to me, Zola, she called me Zola, though everybody else called us Zola. Zola, you need to make a wedding album. You've got lots of wedding songs. We'll dress you in a bride, because it was all about show business and costumes, and you need to make an album. I'm like, no. So I didn't do the wedding album. But fast forward, I wrote, when I started to teach children music and music appreciation and performance, I wrote a lot of songs for the kids for every class. And it started off mostly because I was too lazy to go and learn other people's children's songs. So I would devise the lesson plan and make up songs to just teach them. And eventually parents said to me, where can we buy these songs? And you can't. And then eventually I decided, okay, it's time to make a CD. So I started to produce the albums of children's music.
And when was this?
So this was in the early 80s. And this was already when I was in America. Mm-hmm. And most of the children's albums I did myself at home using keyboards and just layering tracks. And for my adult jazz album in 2006, I went to a professional studio. So while I had done a number of the children's music, a friend of a friend of a friend knew a music producer, a music supervisor in movies in LA. And he contacted me to say, I need you to write a couple of songs for this children's DVD that's coming out based on a book, The Dancing Pumpkin. I'll send you the DVD. I need 3 songs, one about the pumpkin telling the story, one about the skeletons, and one about the big thunderbellies. And so I was commissioned to do that, and that's where the Dancing Pumpkin came from. And my sister was always the one who would push me to do things. She was very pushy. And I am sitting in the back, my mother was so competitive, my sister was so competitive. I did not want to outshine anybody or make anybody upset in case, I'm taking the limelight. So I stepped back. And my sister was the one who kept pushing me and saying, why aren't you in a studio? Go and record. Go. What are you waiting for? So I do owe a lot of my production to her pushing me, because normally, and still today even, I respond. If you ask me to do something, I'll do it. I don't want to be in show business on the stage. I'm not pushing my profession that way, my career. I'm happy. I love staying at home. If you ask me to come and perform or force me like the big sister did to record my album, and then you go and you do your show and you do the concert in the jazz clubs, and then we listen because I'm a good girl. So, I respond.
I can attest to the listening. I got you into the series. It wasn't as easy.
You got me in the series. I certainly was. It was like, okay, yes.
It wasn't as easy as it sounded. All right, so now we want to segue a little bit. We talked about your father. Now I want to talk about the love for your mother. She looks just beautiful there, sitting, and she's there with her husband. So I'd like to know a little bit. And I don't want to spend a lot of time in, but were they in the camps also during?
Yes.
Okay,
so both.
Yeah.
Yeah, but my father was in He went to Port Kunda. He was in Burggraben, and he was in Stutthof. And a lot of his survival was, he calls it fate, destiny, luck, but he also had skills and creativity. And when it was too hard to be working in the fields with the stones and being beaten, he came up with ideas of how to be working inside. So he would volunteer to be the office scribe, or he would volunteer to clean the toilets and build them with tar in all the latrines. So he was ingenious in survival as well. And he met a very good friend in Stutthof who basically saved his life a few times. Malenka was his name. And when my father, during the death march, was literally almost dying because he had typhoid fever, this friend carried him and managed to escape from the last little camp in the middle of the death march and took him to a farmhouse where he nursed him back to health. And then they went to, this was in Lauenburg. My mother had gone from the Vilna ghetto to Riga, to Kaiserwald camp, and also to Stutthof and Sophienwald. And she was with her sister all the time, her sister Mary. So that worked well. And in the ghetto, my mother's survival, she reckons, is mainly because she sang, because she was known as the Wunderkind of the ghetto. She was mostly the leading lady in all the ghetto singing productions, and people would save their bread or their meals and share it with her so that she could keep singing, because the singing and the music in the ghetto just brought so much comfort and almost normalcy in a moment to everybody. And in the camps, when she was in the camps, people recognized her and remembered her as a singer and also begged her to sing. And she even got the German soldiers crying in one of the songs, Ich bin kein, in the ghetto and in the camps. And she remembers that people would give her their last piece of bread in the camps so that she would keep on singing. So her music definitely helped her as well to survive. And her and her sister survived the death march to the Baltic Sea. And they went with some Hungarian girls after the camp to, they were rescued by the Russian soldiers just in time. And I think there were only like 200 girls left on the beach by the time the Russian girls saved them, and put them in some barracks, deserted barracks. And then her and some of her Vilna friends went to find an abandoned house because the Germans had fled. And a few houses away, my father and his friends had found an abandoned house, and they came to hear that there were some Landsmen just down the road. There were some girls from the same town. And they thought, okay, let's go meet the girls. So off they went, the boys. There were about 4 or 5 of them, and they went to this house where the girls were, and they said they met them and they introduced themselves. And then my father recognized this little girl, even though her head was shaven and she didn't look very well. She was starting to get typhoid. And he told her that he knew who she was and that he had written about her. And within a day, the boys then said, come and live with us, because we don't trust the Russian soldiers. A lot of them were raping the women and they were vulnerable. So the girls moved into the boys' house downstairs. And within a day of moving in, my mother became very ill with typhoid. And he nursed her back to health because he had already had his typhoid. And so we always say he nursed her back to health and into love.
Well, that's a great segue. That's a great segue. So I'm going to move to this song, and we will start. And before I do this, why don't you introduce Ich bin allein.
Ich bin kein.
I miss home, okay?
Okay. So Ich bin kein was written by her brother Leib Rosenthal in the Vilna ghetto. And it was written at the time, I think it was for one of the last few, I don't remember which review, there were 4 reviews, but it was written when a number of inmates from other ghettos were moved, when they were liquidated, were moved into the Vilna ghetto. So there were people who kept moving from place to place, and immigrants into the Vilna ghetto from other places, and everybody was missing home. And even the German soldiers. And so he wrote this. This was part of the musical, and this is particularly the tearjerker for most people, and still sung by many, many people around the world today. Ich ben geheim, I long for home.
Okay, hold on one second. We will. We're here.
Wenn Mensch bist jung, ist groß dein Schwung. When you are young, desire burns. You leave the nest and learn to fly, only to find you can't return. Verlost, vergesst dein Heim, dein Nest. Die Zeit kommt nicht zurück. Just to sicher der Mann, you start thinking of the time goes by. Was ist geschehen? Ich will noch einmal sehen mein Heim. Es ist noch als dort, wie gewesen. Vier Winter Tischel and a chair, I left my childhood over there. Ich bin geheim. I long to see my home again, just as it used to be back then. My Schwester's paintings on the wall, the rug I tripped on in the hall. Mein Orumheim. I long to see my home again. The piano we all played back then. My mama's flowers she would grow, my tata's favorite radio. Ich bin geheim. The steps on which I scrape my knee, the wooden gate, the lemon tree. These precious memories I keep, weil die Zeit kommt nicht zurück. Ich bin geheim. Ich bin
Beautiful. And so we've come to the second interview end, and we're going to be coming right back with Zola Shuman. And I'm Jeffery Giesener for the Obligations of Memory podcast for the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance Group. Please come right back. We have more fun discussions with Zola, and certainly much more music. See you soon.
Bye.